Welcome to Modern Farm Business Podcast. This podcast is designed to help the farm leader bring their business to the next level. We'll cover everything from leadership and finance to strategy and planning. I'm your host, Dean Hefta. A key responsibility of leaders is the ability to make sound decisions. Now, that doesn't mean we should funnel every decision in the business through one or two people, but the tough and important decisions, the ones that really impact the future of the business, have to get wrestled with by the leader of the operation. Today, we're going to cover 3 tools that can help you, the leader, have more confidence in your decision-making, and we'll finish with some traps to be aware of as well. So let's get started. A lot of people have heard of postmortems or after-action reviews. These are the debriefs after a project is done or a season is over, where we get everybody involved together and review what went well, what could have gone better, what do we want to do differently next time. And the Army is famous for these, and over the long term, it helps teams to learn and make better decisions. Unfortunately, as the name implies, the learning doesn't happen until after the project is done. So what do? Well, there's an alternative called the Premortem. As the name implies, this happens at the beginning of the project rather than at the end. The hope is that we'll be able to make decisions today that are more effective if we first take ourselves out into the future. So the leader starts with the team getting together and stating that the project is now complete and it has been a complete failure. Everyone in the room now begins writing independently every reason they can think of for that failure. Now the leader goes around asking for one reason at a time until you run out of unique things that caused the failure. This gives the leader a chance to really see all of the potential different causes that the team came up with, and they can now begin digging into building a plan to shore up those issues. Maybe it affects the actual decision we make on the project, or it could be that we just begin establishing some backup plans so that if this thing comes up, we could be more prepared. And so we can have a contingency plan. This type of conversation allows the team to get their thinking creative about what caused this to not go well, so we can be proactive in our planning process. What I like is that it really gets those perspectives out. It gets us thinking about the hurdles and the issues so that we don't get so caught up in the euphoria of the new project or the new event or the new opportunity. And it can give us as leaders a lot more confidence to move forward with the decision. So, consider trying the pre-mortem out with your team or even by yourself for that matter on the next big project or decision that you run into. You can ask yourself that same question as you're driving down the road thinking about that project. So give it a try. The second approach that gives you a process to strengthen your decision-making we'll call Proact. It provides us stages to work our decision-making through. Step 1 is identifying the problem. Too often we get caught up coming up with solutions before we really have an understanding of the problem at hand. When we aren't diligent about digging in to understand the problem, we can find ourselves spending time and money solving symptoms, not problems. For example, you're out in the spring checking your crop and you see some nutrient deficiencies. The first reaction could be, we need to get some nutrients out here to solve the problem. But many of us know from firsthand experience that what we're seeing is likely a symptom and not the actual problem. It might be a compaction issue, cold weather, herbicide, or something else going on. If we don't take enough time on the problem, we can end up throwing a lot of money dealing with symptoms. So, once you're clear on the problem, take some time now to identify what you really want. These are your objectives. This is about getting clear on what you want for an outcome of the decision. It's so easy for us to try to fix a problem or go after a good deal without really taking the time to stop and get clear about what is it that we really want. So when we're deciding about building a bin, our objective might be faster harvest or being able to take more advantage of basis and carry opportunities. Now, those might seem self-evident, but there is power in stopping for a moment before we jump into solutions to get really clear on the outcome we want. That can give us a different perspective on how we end up even tackling our decision process. Now we can jump into the solution side and begin identifying alternatives. Now that we're clear on the problem and the outcomes that we want to have, we can get creative on how we're going to go about solving it. Getting lots of ideas out, getting into the creative problem solving. By having choices, even if it's 2 or 3, we can begin seeing different paths of action. You can even challenge yourself to come up with a certain number of solutions. Having to come up with 5 or 10 solutions can really get our mind working more broadly than just the first answer that has come to our mind on how we're going to fix it or doing what we did the last time we encountered this. Next is looking at consequences. This is the beginning of the evaluation of the alternatives. The choice process is getting real now because you're looking at the what-ifs. Maybe you immediately narrowed down the alternatives to 3 viable ones. You can take them out, take the time to look at how closely the solution will get to your objectives. It gets you into the if-then thinking. If we do this, how good is it going to get us to our desired outcome? Finally, you have to look at trade-offs. As you look at your list of desired objectives and different solutions, you have to begin wrestling with and determining how the goals become in conflict and you can't achieve all of your objectives. You have to start wrestling with what's really important and how the different solutions are going to force some objectives to be better served than others. Now, as you go through this process, the hope is that the best choice begins to rise to the surface. But the reality is life and leadership is messy. No decision is ever going to be perfect. We never have all the information we need at the time. Our responsibility is to be diligent in our process, making the best decision we can, and that's the key. You have to decide. And by the way, your decision might be to do nothing. Deciding to do nothing is much different than refusing to make a decision and ending up doing nothing. And we have to commit to the decision and ensure follow through. If you want to dig in more deeply to this model, there's a good book called Smart Choices. We'll put a link into the show notes. The third decision approach tool we'll call the 4 whats. This is useful once you have decided on a likely action but haven't implemented it yet. This tool uses 4 questions that force some thinking and get us looking at implications. The first question is, what will happen if I do this? It's straightforward and fits into really how we're already thinking about the solution, but it narrows us to the things that are going to occur because of the decision. That first one is easy. We're already thinking about what's going to happen if I do this. The second question is, what will happen if I don't do this? This gets us identifying all the things that will occur if we don't do the thing we're thinking about doing. So, for example, I'm considering expanding my facility. I've already identified what will happen if I do it. Now I want to look at what will happen if I don't do it. The third question is now, what won't happen if I do this? See, this flips the question around to the areas that maybe aren't on our radar so much, the things that won't occur. So what won't happen if I do the facility expansion? Maybe I won't have to buy a new truck, or maybe I won't need to lease additional space. The final question, and you've probably figured out the pattern, is what won't happen if I don't do this? This is a more complex question that takes some reflection. What are the things that aren't going to occur if I don't move ahead with the decision? So if I don't do the expansion, what won't happen? Well, I won't be distracted by the construction project, or I won't be increasing my loan at the bank. Whatever it is that won't happen if I don't do this. Through these questions, what will happen if I do this? What will happen if I don't do this? What won't happen if I do this? What won't happen if I don't do this? We can feel more confident about our decision And the questions are useful in a group setting or even by myself. So put those questions to work when you're getting ready for that decision. Now, before we finish the topic, I want to hit on some traps that are important for us to manage. There's a lot of psychology involved in decision making, and to be a solid decision maker, we need to be aware of some forces at work that aren't always apparent to us. I have 5 of them here that I want to share with you and get you thinking about how they might live in your world as you're making decisions. The first to be aware of is the draw of the status quo. Very often, when we're looking at doing something new, if we're uncertain about how to move forward, and if the uncertainty is too big, we'll likely default to doing what we've always done, even if it's not the best thing. Now, recognizing that sometimes, as we stated earlier, when you're making decisions, the right answer is to keep doing what you've been doing and not to make changes. But that should be an outcome of the decision process and something you're deciding to do. We're deciding to keep doing this rather than, I just can't decide among these 3 choices, so I think we'll just keep doing what we've always done. That's really saying we're not going to decide, and so we're just going to keep doing what we've always done. The next trap is dealing with the wrong question. Good decision-making begins with a clear understanding of the problem and then asking ourselves good questions to get us focused on what we really want. A trap for us can be starting the process with the solution, or even worse, what one of our previous guests on the show, John Miller, would call victim questions. When is somebody going to do something about this? Why don't they ever let me know? When will they understand what they need to do? These types of questions are paralyzing. They keep us from moving forward and are really victimizing in our mind. We need to replace those with questions like, what can I do? Or what's the real issue here? So be aware of when we're asking ourselves the wrong question. A third trap is around sunk costs. This happens with machinery, land, people, you name it. We face sunk costs that hold us back from doing what needs to be done. I have a vehicle that I just put $3,000 in repairs, so I'm reluctant to sell it. I have an employee that isn't fitting my farm's culture, but I've put all kinds of time and training, so I'm reluctant to let them go. These are all examples of the costs that we have sunk into a project or a person that are now keeping us from doing what needs to be done. The reality as leaders is that we need to be able to emotionally write off the costs that we've already put in and look at the situation from today and moving forward. Another is confirmation bias. This is a big one. This is where we have a belief, an opinion, a perspective on a certain thing. This belief then leads us to only let information in that supports our beliefs and delete and filter out any information that might be to the contrary. So let's say I believe Dodge pickups are the best that I can buy. Confirmation bias prevents me from seeing or hearing any information that threatens that perspective, regardless of the source. Managing confirmation bias requires seeking out alternative information, being proactive about that. It means asking ourselves questions like, how might I be wrong in my perspective, or what might I not be considering? And requires an openness to the possibilities of different perspectives. Now, that process might lead us back to identifying, hey, for my fit, for my needs, Dodge is the best fit. But that's been arrived at not from a filtered approach, but from a very conscious and open approach. The final trap that I'll share today is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is a bias that really speaks to the fact that we see around us, that people with low abilities or understandings in certain areas have an illusion of superiority of performance if they were doing that area. So let's say it another way. The less familiar we are with something, the more convinced that we would be successful at doing it. It's watching a tennis match and laughing at the player who misses a shot, saying any idiot could have returned that shot, even though you've never even held a tennis racket. It plays out in business. Let's say you've built a successful farm, then started a successful excavation business. Then one day someone says the restaurant in town is for sale, and you think to yourself, any idiot could run a successful restaurant. I'm going to buy it. Even though you've never worked at a restaurant, you've never had any interaction with the business of a restaurant other than being a customer. In this situation, the lack of knowledge about the business led you to overestimate how successful you would likely be at the venture. To manage this, recognize first the tendency that we have to overestimate our abilities in areas that we aren't familiar with. Then ask yourself, how can I get the basic knowledge to better understand and increase my likelihood of success? I need to know enough to be able to calibrate how likely am I to be good at this. And it's about getting enough information to make better, more informed decisions. So we've covered a lot of ground today. 3 decision tools, the Premortem, the Proact model, and the 4 whats. We've covered 5 cognitive traps to be aware of in our decision process: status quo, wrong question, sunk costs, confirmation bias, and the Dunning-Kruger effect. I hope this has been helpful for you as a leader. I encourage you to listen back through it and pull out 1 or 2 things that you can try out this week as you're making decisions. If you have stories or questions, you can always reach me at dean@modernfarmbusiness.com. I'll also ask a favor that if you have a couple of friends or neighbors that would benefit from this podcast, be sure to let them know about it. I look forward to seeing you again next week.